I've got a notion to throw out there. Ohio State's for real. I mean, clearly the schedule, I've talked about the schedule, Mark, through 3 weeks, 3 non-conference games, obviously, given the circumstances with the conference realignment and whatnot. But um, honestly, if Ohio State didn't go at least 11-1, I don't know who else is on the schedule, guys. I know Penn State's on the schedule, obviously Michigan. I'm
At
guessing
Oregon.
at Oregon next week. So, yeah, but I still think 11-1. This weekend will be a measuring stick, I would think, primarily for the Ohio State offense more than anything else. I mean, I don't know what you really gather from a beat down on Iowa's offense. If they can stop the run, I talked with Mark about this yesterday. I think maybe the best approach to this game might be to kind of give Caleb Johnson his and just say, hey, you're not going to beat us with a one-dimensional offense. We're too good offensively ourselves. And, I know that that's probably not a real popular opinion. I know a lot of people will probably be advocating for Ohio State to go all in on Iowa's one strength on offense. But I think the one way Iowa wins this game is if they find a play or two over the top to accompany a really good a defensive performance, and an adequate run game. I don't think if they can't throw anything over the top, if they can't find a man beater or two in this game, I have a hard time seeing Iowa going on the road and winning. It may be close, but I just don't know that you have enough talent-wise in the bag to win a game in the fourth quarter against this Buckeyes team.
Well, we were talking about this earlier with Caleb Johnson, the Iowa State game where he rushed for 180 some yards, but in the fourth quarter, 11 carries for 17 yards. Is there just too much on him at this point, and maybe too many long runs? Is he getting winded in that fourth quarter with all these 30-yard runs and 27-yard runs? But what was it with the fourth quarter that basically eliminated him from that game?
That's a good question. I mean, I know we talked with Liddell Betts after that game. We had him during our assistant coach availability on Wednesdays, and he basically said, "Hey, Caleb's fine right now as far as gas in the tank, but there may come a time later in the season where, we're gonna need to play Kamari Moulton more. We're gonna need to play LeSean more. Certainly, Jazz Patterson has looked good here since he's been back from injury, but I don't really know. I mean, I have to go back and watch that fourth quarter. I actually thought he was impressive at times in that fourth quarter. A lot of short yardage situations where he was churning his legs and getting extra yards. But yeah, I mean, he's getting a lot of snaps. I think the crazy thing about it, the number of yards he's had through these games, he didn't play he was suspended for the first half of the Illinois State game, and he still ended up with like 130 yards in that game. So this will be, I mean, we talk about the test for Ohio State's offense. How about a test for Caleb Johnson? Because the numbers heading into 2 weeks ago against Minnesota said that Minnesota's rush defense was one of the better rush defenses in the country. But again, such a small sample size this early, regardless of who Ohio State's played. I think it's fair to say, and Mark, you've talked about the talent level Ohio State has on both sides of the ball, but specifically on defense, this is a test for Iowa's rush offense. If they come in here and run, for 200 yards, they're averaging, I think, close to 250 right now, which is pretty insane given what they've done since 2020, then that's incredible. But, the one thing about this running back room, they've protected the football. They haven't coughed it up. I don't know that they've fumbled at all this year. I don't think they've lost any fumbles. And, Caleb Johnson is taking a heavy load. So Kirk did say yesterday during his press conference, LeSean is back healthy. That's something we didn't cover yesterday, Mark. LeSean Williams is back healthy finally. And Seth Anderson at receiver is back healthy. Now, how much will those two guys factor in? I thought LeSean was the starter before we knew that Caleb Johnson was going to explode this year. And Seth Anderson, I anticipate as a starter. But, that wide receiver room is so unproven that you miss 4 weeks. I think it's going to be hard to climb back into the fray. But, yeah, this will be the biggest test for Iowa's offense. And the one thing we talked with your guy yesterday, Mark, Pat, over with 247, he brought up Ohio State's linebacker core maybe being, if there is a weak spot on this Ohio State defense, it's maybe the linebackers. So perhaps the run game can get going. And like I said, I may, if I'm Ohio State, I may play kind of safe on that side of the ball and let him get his. If they start to bring those DBs up to try to cheat up on the run game, Iowa's going to have to. I think Lester's ready, given his verbiage last week during his presser. I think he's ready to take a shot or two. And if you're not going to take a shot or two against Ohio State, then what are you saving it for?
Yeah, Corey, if I can ask Tim Lester, just what's he brought in a nutshell? What has changed about Iowa's offense, and what do they hope to morph it into over time? I know when you come in and inherit personnel, you have to write it in a way that your people can execute it and move the football. But what's the hope on that side of the football? It feels like there's finally some hope on that side of the football.
Yeah, good questions. He's not getting any of his guys, really, right? I mean, he brings in Brendan Sullivan, who's not starting. He brings in Jacob Gill, who is probably the best starter. He brings him in with Sullivan from Northwestern, and he's a guy to watch for maybe a big play or two on Saturday. Um, but when he got hired, based upon his resume alone, you think, okay, he's going to be able to take the group that he has, although talent wise is not where it needs to be to probably run the system that Lester wants to run. He's going to get the most out of the quarterback position. He's going to get the most out of receiver position. They're getting more production there. Situational play calling has been much better. I think back to the third quarter against Minnesota 2 weeks ago, you're trailing 14-7. I thought they got a little stale on early down situations. A little predictable with the run game on first down. They come out first play from scrimmage in the third quarter. They go play action naked, and they hit a big play to a tight end. There have been a little less tight end involvement, Steve, through 4 weeks than I would think. But it's acclimating to tight end you, if you will. And I think the ideal, Lester has preached this over and over and over again. Yes, it's always going to start with the run, especially at Iowa, but they've got to hit explosive plays. And that's one thing under Brian Ferentz. We really didn't hear that type of preaching from Brian over the course of time. But Lester he's made it clear they want and feel the need to hit big plays down the field. So we haven't really seen them attempt plays down the field. That's the thing about this right now. They had a couple of shots week 1 against Illinois State where I thought Cade got fortunate on a couple of those. He's not always possessed the best of footwork this year. Tim Lester did say last week that he thinks Cade played his best game against Minnesota. The stats may not show that, but they didn't throw the ball much. And they had a few drops. There were a couple misrun routes. Lester even blamed himself for a bad play call that resulted in a sack or a throwaway. So, I know that sounds cliche, but there's a lot of motion pre-snap. Yeah, that's window dressing, if you will. But they want to run the ball and then get into manageable third and 3, 3rd and 4 situations where you can kind of have a more open playbook. And I think in large part through 1 month of the season, I know some people are frustrated in the Iowa fan base about not having a passing game, but this is Mark will tell you, this is exactly where I predicted this team to be, with the exception being I thought they'd be able to grind their way to a win against Iowa State, and they should have won that game. I still think Iowa's probably the better team. But hey, the schedule wasn't real daunting. I thought, hey, if you can get to October and into the bye week, running the ball really well, figure out the passing game, and maybe kind of take this game, even though nobody expects him to go to Columbus and win. If you can kind of figure out something in the passing game by the time we hit this game or the game following against Washington, you're in a good position. So I think they're right to script. And like I say, if you've been saving anything with the play action passing game, one example of that is we haven't seen them take a shot on a waste down. And I had a conversation with Tim Lester at Media Day about waste downs, because that's one thing that was a huge pet peeve of mine and Coach Patterson on our show after every game is under Brian Ferentz and under that regime. I mean, you can count on one hand how many times Iowa even tried to take advantage of a 2nd and 1, 2nd and 2, which I know some coaches don't believe in them, but based on, I think the majority, good coaches do take advantage, at least at times, of waste downs. So we may see a waste down shot this week.
Yeah. Iowa and Michigan, the only teams in the Big Ten this year without a 40-yard completion. And when you look at the two opponents that Iowa has faced in terms of group of 4 now, Iowa State and Minnesota, they're averaging like 3.3 yards per pass attempt. Is the difference between, is it that they're not going downfield? Not that they go downfield much, but are they throwing, is Cade McNamara throwing closer to the line of scrimmage in those games than the other games where he feels more confident and have more ability to hit guys maybe intermediate 15 yards down the field? Is that something that is not available to them, or that they're not even looking for in against the tougher opponents? Because if they're not even looking for it, then he's already limiting himself. So is it not available, or is he not even attempting anything downfield?
There have been a couple that have been missed that you look back on tape and it's clear he's missed guys. Although Lester did say last week, you may have caught this during his press conference, Tony, but he made a comment about how he had a couple of deep shots ready to go against Minnesota, and he said he brought them up in a quote group forum during the game, and he was voted down. Which is funny. I asked Coach Patterson about that on Monday during our live show, and he was kind of like, I don't know. That might be something that Kirk says later. Don't share that kind of stuff with the media, Tim. But he said it, and I'm kind of glad he said it because that gives fans at least an idea that, hey, whether Kirk is shutting that down or if it's, maybe Patterson brought up how, that may be an offensive line coach thing where, hey, we can't protect Cade long enough to give you that. Or maybe it's John Budmeyer as a receivers coach. So it's not necessarily just on Kirk, but they are there. And I think Lester has them ready. There have been a couple of times where Cade's checked down where he probably didn't need to. It would be nice if Cade was a little bit more mobile. There's the one sack he took against Minnesota. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, pressure came from what I guess it'd be 3:00. All he had to do was kind of roll 5:00, and he just, the shoelace tackle went down, somersaulted, and took the sack. But that's a play. If you're Brennan Sullivan, you probably escape and maybe look down the field in a rollout and hit someone. So, not saying they're going to be utilizing Brennan Sullivan in normal yardage situations this week, but I do think if the opportunity presents itself, if they're going to take a shot at any point, I would guess it'd be this week. And I would think that those conversations behind closed doors, Kirk's not going to just forever say no to big plays. That would just be stupid on his part. And I'll continue to double down on my notion that the biggest issue in the last 3 seasons with not taking explosive shots down the field has been with play calling. It's not been with Kirk holding people back. I know there's that perception around the conference and even around the country, but Lester will have something in the bag, and they've had a couple of plays where they've got more receivers open. Tony, that's the other thing. Like, there are more guys open this year than ever before. That's been, we talked last 2 seasons at year's end. Each year we talk about receiver separation not being good enough. We talk about quarterback play, quarterback mobility, situational play calling, red zone offense. All those things have been a problem. You don't become the worst offense in the country without having a bunch of issues. And so many of those issues have been somewhat remedied. And that's why, the numbers say that they're no longer even close to bottom of the barrel. Now we'll see what they do against a real good defense this week.
You mentioned the ability to protect. Chip Kelly said something yesterday that I thought was very interesting in terms of designing plays and drawing them up on a sheet of paper. He said he's discovered that 1 inch of a pass route equals 1 second of pass protection. So, like in your 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, the deeper you're going, and 4 inches of route needs 4 inches or 4 seconds of pass protection. I just think it's interesting that in terms of the downfield stuff, you've got to be able to protect it, as we all know. But just
And let me
interesting,
just say
Matt.
real quick, Tony,
Yeah.
not to interrupt you, but one thing nobody's brought up, and I don't really know how much of a storyline it is, but Chip Kelly had there had been contact between Chip Kelly and Kirk regarding the OC job during the offseason. So that was confirmed. So that there was at least contact. And I don't think those conversations ever went anywhere, but that's a kind of a funny storyline, an interesting storyline now that he's running that Ohio State offense. So, Mark, I was
That would
going
have been good to know yesterday.
yeah, I would have been curious. I'm sure Chip probably wouldn't have commented on it.